Okay, now, the tragedy was something else, which is that that boom that I told you about was supposed to be right there on that island, right at Bly Island, right where the ship hit. There was supposed to be a containment barge that would skim it out and run the stuff around. And there was supposed to be an emergency crew on 24/7 notice. You have what's called an oil response team, just like a fire truck. You don't hold big events like this in cities without having a firehouse that's ready to go in case something goes wrong, right? You don't send out oil under the law, under the federal law, unless the oil spill response team is in place. You know what the response team was? The Titlik natives. They were hired. They were hired, they were trained to drop from helicopters, lay the boom, take the equipment. It wasn't put out. Now, who was in charge? Exxon's name was in the ship. Who was in charge of putting out that boom? Who fired the natives? They were brought in and hired, as it turns out, just to bust a Teamster union strike. And then once they busted the strike, they fired the natives. Never told the federal government. They told the federal government the natives were still on duty. They took away their equipment too because they were afraid that they were going to steal the rubber boom. And as one native said to me, you know, I eat seal. What am I going to do with a rubber boom? You know, that's what happened. And the company in charge is called Alyeska. Cool name, huh? Alyeska, which is simply the corporate alias for a company called British Petroleum. So the name on the ship was Exxon, but the name on the destruction was BP Inc. And that story has not come out. And so when I saw them do it again, no cruise, no boom. The president waited 5 days. He could have contained it if he did it in 5 hours. He waited 5 days to federalize it because BP, which has to pay when the federal government takes over, said, we'll take care of it. So they went, and oil is just like in your kitchen, it just starts spreading, right? By the time the president decided he ought to do something, the slick was bigger than Jamaica, right? I looked at the BP oil response plan. And people make jokes about it because they stole some of the stuff from Alaska. It has walrus protection in it and stuff like that. But the big problem is I was looking for where the rubber boom was. And 600 pages long. And there's like 25 pages on what the public relations response should be. I kid you not, in case of a spill or a blowout. But I looked for where the equipment is. And what they had was one page with telephone numbers. Like, you know, like oil boom is us. Telephone numbers, you know, where they could call and kind of order a takeout, I suppose. That was the plan. So we saw it 20 years ago, and we saw it this past April. It's the same game, it's the same company, it's the same crowd. But why does Chevron come in? I'm going to tell you something. Yes, the Gulf Coast has been absolutely destroyed, but not by BP's oil. Because I saw those pictures. I've investigated down there too. I saw those pictures of Grand Isle looking with all the oil and the dead birds covered in oil in the Cajun area of Louisiana, and everyone was shocked. But I tell you something, if you came there 2 weeks before the spill, you'd have seen the same crappy oil. Grand Isle is always a shithole. I'm telling you straight, caused by the oil companies already. Now, this is why I want to tell you about New Orleans. What? Okay. Very important. Predicate. In 1994, there was a hurricane. Federal seawalls were smashed down. It was a failure of the U.S. government. So the U.S. government paid for every home to be rebuilt in 94. That was West Hampton Dunes. Every one of the $3 million mansions was replaced by the federal government for the subprime loan sharks and the B-grade actresses. They got their homes restored. They even trucked in, the U.S. Army Corps even trucked in hundreds of dump trucks filled with sand to restore the beaches. Okay. But that's West Hampton Dunes. Switch to New Orleans. Well, did we replace the homes there? No, you know why? That was, according to President Bush, an act of God. Now, it's strange for a religious man to blame the Lord for what was, in fact, an act of Chevron. And here's why. Every year, Chevron, BP, are the major drillers there. They channel through the swamps to drill. They don't backfill, which they could because that's too expensive. As a result, the Gulf is slowly moving towards New Orleans. People say, why do they have that city there, so near the Gulf, below sea level? Well, when they built that city there, the Gulf was way far away. And the oil companies have brought it closer and closer. Closer and closer. As the hurricane expert Ivor van Heerden said, yeah, for those who know who he is, every day we have a blowout. We lose 250,000 acres a year of the wetlands. So the Gulf was brought by the oil companies right up to the steps of New Orleans. But that wasn't quite enough. See, the oil companies didn't like the fact that they had to take the lazy old Mississippi River up to New Orleans. See, nature, despite what Mr. Bush says, protected New Orleans with the wetlands and with the curves of the slow curves of the Mississippi. Oil companies had a great idea. We could save a day of shipment if instead of going through this windy old miss, we just dig a trench straight out from the Gulf right up to New Orleans, right straight into New Orleans. The Mississippi River Gulf outlet, Mr. Go. Okay? If you look at a map, if you look at a satellite map, it looks like a rifle barrel pointed right at New Orleans. And what experts called it before Katrina was the Hurricane Highway. They were waiting for the water, for one hurricane to be aimed just right and shoot a wall of water right up Mr. Go. And that's what happened. At the end of Mr. Go's 9th ward, you tell me, was that an act of God? Do you want to blame it on the Lord, Mr. Bush? Do you want to blame an act of Chevron on the Army Corps? A judge has ruled this year, just ruled, that the United States government, pushed by the oil companies, is 100% responsible and must rebuild the homes of New Orleans.